Hi, I'm the library director. Welcome tonight to the Robbins Library. So happy to see you all here, and I'm really excited about what we have to talk about this evening. And I'm going to start off with just a couple words of thanks. I want to thank the Friends of the Robbins Library for providing the snacks in the back. Thank you, friends. I also want to thank the Foundation and the Friends groups that have been so supportive throughout this process, and welcome you all here tonight as library supporters. You're here because you care about the library, and I am really beyond excited to share with you the final designs that have been recommended for improving our libraries for the 21st century users that we are preparing for. I just want to share some powerful data first about how our libraries are being used. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So first I just want to share a little quote from the Boston Magazine, the June Boston Magazine issue. I don't know if you all saw, has everybody seen the Robbins Library featured in Boston Magazine? We were one of 6 libraries featured in this region. So we're in good company. We're with Cambridge, Boston Public Library, MIT Science Fiction Society Library, which I didn't even know existed, Little Free Libraries, and Brookline. So we're just in excellent company. The photos that were featured really kind of captured what is so special about the Robbins Library and about Arlington's libraries in general, which is this dedication to the past and a focus on the future. So they featured our teen section upstairs on the first floor, and they featured, of course, the beautiful reading room. So I was really excited to see that. It's also gotten more likes than any other post we've ever shared on social media, which is something in and of itself. So I just want to go over a few statistics, so bear with me. I'm very proud of these statistics. In the past 3 years, our overall program attendance has increased by 43%.
Nice.
We are 5th statewide in children's program attendance after Boston, Cambridge, Springfield, and Newton.
Wow.
Wow. Teen use of the library has increased dramatically, 41% over the past 2 years based on program attendance. And our teen collections circulate the 3rd best in all of the Minuteman library system, which is a library system of 36 public libraries. The Fox Library, let's talk about Fox for a second. With Saturday hours added in fiscal year 18, the circulation at Fox Library has more than doubled. And the collection size has remained the same. So we're still looking at about 26,000 volumes at Fox, and the circulation has more than doubled. The community conference and study rooms are also in greater demand than ever before. The use of our study rooms and conference rooms, and this room that you're sitting in right now, have increased by 80% in the last decade. So this all shows that this library and Fox are under a tremendous amount of use and strain, and we are not seeing any signs of that trend going in any other direction than up. So it's really tremendous and exciting, and yet how do we prepare best for the future? Because we know in Arlington we have schools that are bursting at the seams. We are getting ready for a new generation in a lot of different ways with the new high school project and all sorts of exciting projects on the horizon. So the library fits into that, and tonight we're going to share our plans and dreams for the future. I want to take a moment to introduce our architects. It's been a real honor and privilege for me to work with Philip Chen and Stacy Woodworth from Ann Beha Architects. Among the clients that we are listed among through Philip's actual, well, through your bio, Philip, include the Smithsonian Institution, the U.S. Department of State, Bates College, Harvard University, University of Chicago, the state. So we're in pretty estimable company there, and I think you'll appreciate the way that they have honored and treated the libraries here in Arlington. And so I'm going to go ahead and bring Philip up and get on with the presentation. And I would just ask that you hold your questions until the end, because we'll probably, during the course of this presentation, be answering a lot of the questions that you may have about the process and how it's unfolded over the course of the year, okay? So bear with us, and yeah.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you. And thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you for having us here. It's fantastic. It's been a fantastic process for us too, and we were just commenting on our last public meeting, our first public meeting we had, was almost exactly a year ago. It was June 13th in 2017. So it's just been over a year that we've been working with Andrea, the library, and the committee and the staff, and it's been a great process. We're so glad to hear talk about two libraries, the Robbins Library and the Fox Library, two libraries which are very different from each other, but we know how essential they are, how central they are to community life here in Arlington. This building that we're in, it's a magnificent building. It's really a civic landmark in Arlington, a town landmark. And the Fox Library, which is newer, more modern, but is in a very dynamic and changing, and again, a really exciting part of Arlington. East Arlington serves a great population. So both very different but very important libraries. We always start our office. We do work with a lot of libraries. We work with a lot of historic properties, and we always like to look back to see, where it was we were and where it is we're going. So, you see here the building. This building was built by a Boston architect, or designed by a Boston architect. The same architect actually who designed the Boston Athenaeum some 50 years before this building was built. It was built in 1892, which is actually 3 years. It opened 3 years before the central branch of the BPL. But you see that when it was designed in this monumental style, this Italianate Renaissance style. And to me, what that really signifies is how important the library was going to be for the town of Arlington. It really was going to be a civic landmark at that time, and it has become that way. And in the 1930s, you see there the addition, which is now the fiction room, where the fiction collection is contained. That was an addition that was built in the 1930s afterwards. The interiors, again, I think they're dignified, elegant, stately, and they signify how important this was going to be for the town of Arlington. With the ornate fixtures, the gold leaf, but really just a magnificent, magnificent room. This is the addition that was built some 30-some years later after the original building was built. And if you look at it now, you can still see a lot of this historic fabric and material. Stand here, the microphone in the room. You can see this was built as a youth room and a meeting room shortly, well, some 30, 40 years after the library was built. So here is the building today. And it still has that historic character, still that monumentality, still that civic presence. But as Andrea said, here we're featuring the teen room too, but it's changing. As we know, Arlington has changed. So the library is adapting to new needs, and that's very much about what our study was about, how to adapt to the new needs of Arlington. The Fox branch, again, a very important part of community life here in Arlington. I think one of the earliest branch libraries actually moved from the Crosby School over into the storefront, this converted storefront in the 50s. And then this was expanded in the 60s. But here you see the early Robbins Library, East Arlington branch, actually with its entrance right on the Mass Ave. You go into the interior of the Fox Library now, and it's very wide open, it's very spacious, very flexible. These are some of the great things about the way the library was planned. The little Fox shop, which my family has frequented very many times. Again, an essential part for the community, bringing people into the library. And then the lower level where there is the community room, as well as some other community spaces. Again, a very heavily used part of the library for the community, but could probably be used more often. So here are the libraries, just where they are today, and very different from each other. They serve different parts of Arlington, but very important and full of potential and possibilities. And that's what's so exciting for us about this project. Stacy and I have been really loved working on this project. I should say that I'm an Arlington resident, so it's been a very personal pleasure for me to work on this project. My family, my girls, have been heavy users of the library, both the Fox and the Robbins branch. So it's been really fantastic. We're grateful for the opportunity to work on this project. So let me say a little bit about what we hope to present to you tonight, and we want to leave plenty of time for discussion. But as I said, this has been a little bit over a year-long process that we've been working with Andrea, with the committee, with the town. We want to talk a little bit about the process, and then the program of the needs that we developed with the committee and the town for the libraries, how we looked at different options for accommodating those needs in both the libraries, where we arrived with the final design, and then the plan for implementation. So that's what we hope to cover tonight. Is there anything else? Well, then we'll do some questions and answers. So let me say where we started with this study. Really, the scope of this study, the very first part was about information gathering. And that was a process that we began to hear what the needs from the community were for both these libraries, for both the Fox and for the Robbins Library. Then we developed, as we collected this feedback, we developed what's called a space needs program. So how would those needs be met in the library? So we came up with a program, really a list, an inventory of spaces that would then meet those needs. How do we fit those needs, that program, into the libraries? That's where we came up with conceptual options, where we began to test these needs in both the libraries. And we looked at several options. We'll show some of them tonight. Once we came up with a final concept, then we talked about, okay, how are we going to do this? What's the roadmap for implementing these changes to the library? So that was really the scope of the study. Who did we work with? So we worked, again, with Andrea. We had a working group that had representation from both libraries, from both the Robbins, from the Fox, from the Friends of the libraries, as well as the foundation and the town. So we had a good representation from both libraries, as well as their stakeholder groups. This is just an overview of the schedule. You see we began last spring of 2017 as we began to gather information. The first phase really of the study was about programming, developing, listening, and then developing what the needs were going to be for the libraries. And then the second phase, which we really started from last fall into now, was about how do we fit those needs into the libraries, and what's a plan for implementing that. So here's the overall view. Here we are at the end of the process, and here we were just about a year ago when we had our public meetings at the Robbins and the Fox. So it wasn't just Anbea Architects. We also brought a team of consultants, structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, code. We brought a team of experts and consultants into both buildings to survey the infrastructure, to look at the structure, to look at the systems, to look at the code implications of the existing building. And so this whole process began with a very thorough assessment of those libraries. And then the public meetings. So we had 2 public meetings, which were very well attended, where we asked questions, we listened to what the needs from the community were. And we did that here at the Robbins, we did it at the Fox. I think the one up there, I think we did it at the Fox first. So that was June 13th. So like I said, almost exactly a year ago. And then we did the second meeting at the Robbins, I think June 21st. And we do have another meeting next week that will be at the Fox. So again, trying to reach both communities. And we had a very sort of broad approach to collecting information. So this was posted up here in the children's area, and so hearing from the full community of what's needed. And what do I love about here? More movies, please. So, very well-mannered child there. More Xbox video games, and this is my favorite here. It's a picture I think of a dog or a cat. Or maybe a duck. Yeah, right. But I think, but what I'd say is that we really tried to reach out to the entire community to find out what the needs were for the library. We also had an electronic survey, which we received nearly 500 responses from. So, you know, the public meetings, we had paper questionnaires, which we handed out, and then we had electronic surveys. And so what are some of the things that we heard? What is it that we love about these libraries here in town? It may be ironic, but the number one thing overwhelmingly was the books. So we know that libraries are changing. They're changing every day. A lot of new programs are coming, but we don't want to lose the books. People still come to library overwhelmingly for the books. I think probably the second thing we heard the most about the libraries is the staff. People came here, we heard that people come from other towns, they come here because the staff is so good. So that's one thing that is really wonderful about the libraries. The programs, the spaces, the beautiful architecture, I'm assuming that means the Robbins Library. But I think, you know, the idea of a separate teen space, so, but it really, we heard was that it's a space for the community. It's for the entire community. It's a safe space for the entire community. So that's something that we really took to heart. Books, staff, the community. So who are the people that are using these libraries? So you can see here about, you know, 3/4 of the respondents visit the Robbins monthly or more, and about a quarter visit the Fox monthly or more, okay? From about 468 online survey responses. Who else? Well, it's interesting, over half of the respondents were between ages 31 and 50, and if you add the next group, this pie piece right here, it's nearly 3/4. And if you add the 61 to 70, that's 90%. It's really 90% of are really in that age range. These are the people that are visiting the library. And over half of the people that come to the libraries come with children between 0 and 10. So, you know, that gave us a good picture. It's a very diverse community. A lot of people come here for a lot of different things, for not only the books, but the programs. And again, it's just a safe space for the community. What are some of the other things that we heard from the community? More public space, more group study rooms, right? So more amenities, improved bathroom facilities, more space for teens and kids. So again, reflecting, I think, the way that Arlington is changing and in really exciting ways. The library should be able to accommodate those. A cafe area, lighting, better infrastructure here, better technology. For the Fox branch to be fully accessible. So a lot of this is, again, about increasing access to the great resources that they are. And more seating for adults at Fox. So again, trying to reach out to these diverse audiences, accommodate them all. As we worked through these with the working group, these are some of the things that the working group made recommendations about. Again, more group study rooms that are easily accessible, pumping room, looking at access and security, teen space at the Fox. Again, that's a way that the East Arlington demographic is changing with more young folks there and more community provisions at the Fox. So working all those things together, the community input, working with the working group, we came up with a program for the Robbins Library, which includes, okay, expanded teen space. That's been one of the most successful and well-used spaces here. So really expanding the teen space. More group study rooms, a dedicated story time space for the children's area, okay? Cafe-style seating, you know, more casual seating for people who spend much of the day here or come here at different times of the day. New bathrooms, gender-neutral bathrooms, so being able to provide better visitor amenities for the patrons here at the library. New lighting, reconfiguring the circulation and reference desks, really being able to give people more access to the wonderful staff here and services. And then renovating staff spaces, just to allow the staff to work more efficiently, work better, and be able to accommodate more patrons. The Fox, when we looked at the Fox, accessible is down here, but that was one of the most important things, is really just making the Fox accessible. Not just the entrance, but also both levels, increasing access to the Fox. But also the idea that we might create this sort of town conference center at the lower level, really use that space more for community programs and activities. Expanding the children's area, carving out a dedicated but flexible teen area also for the Fox Library, and more seating for adults, being able to look out in Lassa Ave. So when I talk about the space needs programs, those are the things that came out of our community input, working with the working group. So the next part was really, how do we work these things into the design? So we took these many concepts: accessibility, lighting, connection to the exterior here, seating, how spaces are organized, adjacencies. We took all these concepts and then started to test them out in different options with both libraries. And so we looked at each library, we looked at really 3 options. And at the Robbins, we looked at one, which we called communities, but what I'd say is that this was an option, a concept where we really looked at renewal, working within the historic building, reorganizing it, moving some spaces around, but really working within the existing boundaries of the existing building. We looked at a second scheme, which we called Library in the Park. Now, the Winfield Robbins Memorial Gardens, it's got a fence around it now because it's undergoing the restoration, but we saw that as an incredible asset for the library. And how can we build more connection to the town gardens? And so there was an idea, the second option we looked at, which looked at turning the face of the library back to the gardens. And including, I should say, more access to this community room here. And then the last one we called the future. And so the first one was really about renewal. The second was about opening up the building a little bit more. The last option, we said, was really looking at the future, and that looked at an expansion of the library. So those are the 3 options, just conceptually, we were looking at for the Robbins. And then as we looked at these options, we also had them estimated, and then we brought this information back to the committee for discussion. Communities, library in the park, the future. Okay, and I'll go through these the schemes a little bit more as we get into it. But talking about the Fox, for the Fox we also looked at options. We looked at one which we called Renovated Fox, and that again looked at renewal for the Fox, and it was a pretty extensive renewal. The systems are pretty much end of life, so it was going bringing accessibility to the building. It was going to require some infrastructure changes. So there was one scheme which we looked at renewing the Fox. There was another scheme we looked at, well, should we be looking for the future there? So we imagined a 2-story Fox, where the library was on the main level. We had the town conference center, what I'm calling the town conference center, community space on the lower level. And then the potential for growth of the library or community space up on the upper level as well. We also looked at a roof terrace there. And then we looked finally at the idea of a new building, which was a single story, but also had the capacity in the future to be expanded to a second story. So it sort of split the difference. It's a single story, but it is looking to the future with a possibility of an expansion to a second story. So those were the 3 options that we looked at for the Fox. Now I'm going to start here with the Fox and tell you where we arrived with the schematic design, and then we'll go to the Robbins. And then I think we'll open it up for discussion after that. Okay. So this is the Fox Library. This is a photo, which we love. As you can see, some of the shelves are still empty, as it was opened in the 50s. This is before it was expanded. But we always loved this idea that it was like a town living room. It had a very informal, casual, but intimate feel to it. But very open, a lot of light, and flexible. And the library, as I said, was expanded in the 60s, and you can see that the entrance was moved from Mass Ave over to Cleveland. And so our initial idea was to make this more visible, make the activities of the library more visible, move the entrance and a new accessible entrance back to Mass Ave, so it has really a civic presence, and have more of a connection to the city. As we look at the first floor here, this is, if you imagine that this is Massachusetts Avenue down here, there's an entry that comes into a lobby. There's an elevator now so that the lower level is accessible as well, and an open stairwell. And then as you walk in here, you see we've tried to maintain the openness, the flexibility, but we've kept the little fox shop in there. But we have now carved out areas for adults, children's area, and for young adults. We have relocated the reference and librarian's desk right here at the elbow of that building, so they can see the whole library from one point. And this is an idea now. This is if you were looking out towards Mass Ave, which would be right over here, and the new entrance. This is Cleveland Street here, and you're right behind you where this rendering is drawn would be the little fox shop. Again, trying to bring a lot of daylight in here, keeping some of the shelving low so you have good sight lines throughout there. You see the librarian's desk right there on the right. That has a very good view and aspect, vantage point to see the whole library. But very flexible, very open. And then as we go to the lower level, what we're talking about this town conference center, we have a large community room, meeting room that's divisible. So it could actually accommodate even larger groups there. But in addition to those, we have small meeting rooms. So if people wanted to reserve small meeting rooms for small groups, they could do that too. But the idea is that we were really trying to maximize the community space here in the lower level of the box. This is, well, let's do that later. Let's do that later. I just wanted to show this. This is a public library that we did in Glens Falls, New York, Crandall Public Library. But this is a community space that we built that was also in the lower level of this library. It also had an exhibit of regional and folk art outside of it. But the idea that it's bright, still, it's very flexible, can be used even for performance, many, many things that can be done in this type of space. Okay. Oh, let me give you. Yeah. So this is an idea of what you would see as you were. We haven't modeled all of Arlington, but just a lot. So as you go here into the main entrance off of Mass Ave, you see also we have a stairwell. That stairwell we were showing as a potential location for local art, potentially, installations. And then as you get into the library here, as you step behind the librarian's desk, you see the little fox. And carving out spaces here, using shelving, keeping it very flexible, but using shelving to carve out spaces for children, for teens, as well as for adults, with plentiful seating along Cleveland Street and Mass Ave.
On the second? There's one.
Just to give you a sense of how that all fits together on the plan. Now let me go to Robbins Library, okay? We'll go to Robbins Library, and then we'll come back and we can speak about the fox again. So the Robbins Library, you know, again, this is actually from the 60s, so you see this edition that was built in the 30s. There was this part of the edition, which was some administrative space, but this is before, of course, the edition, that edition was built in the 90s. But you see that it always had a face really onto the town gardens. And the idea was that it was really a landmark that was in connection with the gardens. The gardens, which are actually designed, I should say redesigned by the Olmsted brothers in the 30s. So we took that idea of this library on the park, in the garden, and tried to create that connection. And so what we proposed, this is the lower level, the community room that we're in right now. We proposed an addition right here that would create a new entrance that goes out onto the park. An entrance, an accessible entrance into here to the community room, as well as a new story time space here. We also looked at renovating the children's space area here, as well as staff space here. Really trying to optimize the space that we have with working with collections as well as staff space, providing modern workplace for the staff. And so this is the back, you know, if you were sort of in the more heavily kind of wooded part of the gardens, this is the back of the 1930s edition, right? And here's the new edition. So our idea would be create this new edition, glassy, that's really a connection to the gardens, and an entrance that would come down to this community room level, right out here. And the idea is that we would open this wall up. You can imagine bringing these windows down to the ground. So you have an accessible entrance into the community room that could even be after library hours. So really making a connection back to the gardens. The idea of renovating the children's space, creating more program space, as well as a story time room that would be part of that addition, the dedicated story time room. As we go up to the first floor, you see now the first floor of that addition, and the idea that we would get sort of informal cafe-style seating there in the addition. We would be reconfiguring the circulation. We would be restoring the reading room, trying to bring back some of the historic character that's there, but reorganizing it so we can really magnify and accentuate it. The area now that is in the 30s edition, which is now fiction, we propose making that the expanded teen area. So that's an area that is dedicated to teens. It can be closed off. They can have programs in there. And then the area where the teens were, which is sort of a smaller sliver here, would be given back to the reorganization of the collections. So it's the expanded teen space. As just Andrea said, it's really honoring the historic character with the restoration of the reading room, but also looking forward with the expanded teen area and the new cafe-style seating. And this is the idea of that addition, that reading room, looking out onto the gardens. This is a teen space now. It would be moving into this room, which is can be restored, but then also really dedicated to teen space. And we would also be looking at renovating the circulation desk as well as the circulation workspace behind there. As we go up to the second floor, one of the things that you'll notice is that we're going to be adding new amenities, restrooms on every floor, as well as renovating the administrative offices. The group study spaces now, as we move up to the third floor, right there in the center, very accessible in addition to the existing group study spaces. And as we get up to the fourth floor, then looking at the workplace, again, making it, the workplace more efficient, more able for the staff to do, to serve. Also some keeping the local history up here, the meeting room, as well as new restrooms up there on the fourth floor. And this just shows about, you know, we did some tests about how to put the collections in here. One of the things, again, as we were listening to the community, is that the books were very important. There were a lot of needs for new programs, but we didn't want it to come at the cost of the books, of the collection. So that was one reason for the expansion, but we also had to look at how does the collection fit into this new building. So this brings together some, reorganizes, makes, I think, more intuitive collections. Andrew, do you want to say anything about the organization of the collection? You don't have to get too much into it.
Yeah, I mean, some of them will not be where you remember. So we're looking to make the collections make more sense together. Right now, as many of you know, our fiction collection is split into 2 sections, with one being in the fiction room and the other being on the 2nd floor. So just bringing some of the collections together that make sense to put back together, and bringing other collections like the large type print down to the ground floor where they're a little bit more accessible. So those are some of the common sense changes we're proposing to make with the new collections arrangement.
So this idea of, we're talking about looking to the future really does, I think, preserve the collections as well as look to the future in new program spaces. So as I said, as we began to develop these concepts, we also had to look at the costs. That's a very important part of it. And just as we looked at the costs, there are many things that go into a project like this. We deal a lot with what we call hard costs. This is just some categories of costs when it comes to a project. Hard costs, which is really the construction of the building and the site. But there are many other costs that are associated with the project that go everything from fees to relocation to surveys, insurance, legal things. So there are other costs which are associated with construction costs. And what I mentioned that because when we look at what the estimates are, we're only looking at this column right here, but there are other costs that are associated with it. Furnishings as well as operations. So there are other costs that are associated with it, but when we estimated the cost, we were looking primarily at the construction cost. So where do all the costs go? We just looked at the different categories of expenses for a project. So for the Fox Library, about 1/3 of it really goes to the architecture, about 1/4 of it goes to the building systems, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. There's money that goes to the contractor in terms of what it takes them to build the project, and then there's some other small portions, components of the work. So this is an all-new building. This is an all-new 1-story building for the Fox that we're proposing. So you see how the costs kind of break apart. For the Robbins, similar kinds of allocations of money, both through the architecture, just a little bit over 1/3, 1/4 to the systems, and then about 1/3 that go to general conditions and markers. So again, these costs, I just want to say that they're based on the idea if we were to start really designing today and started constructing in 2019. So what these costs don't include is if we built this 2 years from now, that we would naturally expect the costs would go up. What we tend to think of escalation, and right now we're seeing escalation in the ballpark. It's very busy. Construction is very active right now. So our estimators are now carrying about 6% of escalation a year, but that changes depending on again, construction activity. So knowing that we might not do this all at one time, Fox may be obvious, but that's a single phase project. You start it and then you finish it, you open it up. But the Robbins, because the work is distributed throughout the building, we looked at it in different phases. Is it possible to get started, if you're not going to do the whole thing at once, is it possible to get started on certain components? So we proposed that there might be potentially 6 phases, starting with the addition, the community room, and the children's storytime room, then doing the move of the teens and adult fiction, the 2nd and 3rd floor bathroom, the setting room. So, we broke this down into components that we thought made sense, and working with the committee came up with an order that we thought made sense. Now, it doesn't mean you couldn't do this all at once. You could do it all at once. Of course, the expense would be greater, but then you're not paying escalation for doing it later. But there are many different ways to divide this project up. And so we looked at what the cost would be for each of these components individually. Okay? And again, these are the costs, assuming that we started construction in 2019. And you see here then how those phases for the Robbins phases break out in terms of the overall cost. Much of the cost, the bulk, if you were to do this as one project, a little bit over half would go to the addition of community room and children's area. Purple slide is in. Oh yeah. Yes. So here's the idea of the addition, again, very open and transparent, with views onto the garden. And this idea that there would be an accessible entrance to the community room at the lower level as well as the children's story time. That's a flexible room that could be also used for other community programs. Oh, sorry. Okay, now and this is the view teen area, and then going out into the first floor of this addition with the cafe-style seating, views out into the garden. Could be used for other programs as well. We look at different potential layouts and uses for that. Yeah.
All right. So regardless of your questions, can we give our architects a hand? Probably guess at one of the first questions that you may have, which is, when will this happen and who's going to pay for it, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a two-part question. Right. So I just want to explain that this is the very beginning of what will ultimately be a years-long process. We set out not knowing exactly what we were going to find out that we wanted or needed out of the library spaces. And so this, in some ways, was a study. It was an exploration. And so where we are now is at the beginning of the next phase, which is going to be exploring all of the funding sources that are available to us. Many libraries in Massachusetts make use of Mass Board of Library Commissioners grants through the state. Libraries make use of private fundraising opportunities, of existing trusts. So I'm going to be exploring with the trustees and all the other concerned parties the ways in which we might move forward with this project. So I just want to lead off with that. But I would now invite your questions. Yeah.
It's a small detail, but the pumping room in Robbins, is that mechanical for the building or is that facilities for nursing mothers?
Facilities for nursing mothers. Thank you so much. What a great question. Yes, a maternity room, a nursing room, a mothering room. There are lots of different terms for pumping rooms. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
So this modernist design that's been employed for the new addition on the Robbins, is that fixed in stone at this point, or is it open for discussion?
Well, I think what this design does, I appreciate the question. I hadn't thought of it as a modernist design.
That's mid-century modern, it's a glass box.
It does showcase, similar to how we have in the Robbins Library now, the exterior of the building showcased in the 1992 edition. This is, I think, I mean, if I understand the concept correctly, a little bit of a continuation of that. This idea of showcasing the original facade, the original building, in a way that also expands our space.
Can I make a comment?
Of course.
The reason we're here is because we were disturbed to see such a modern and jarring addition to the library to, an elegant, as you said, beautiful Italian-made structure built in the 1890s with an addition from the 1990s that respected that architecture. And now, it essentially looks like Lever Brothers or something grafted onto the back of the library. So my thought is, if there's still, time to reconsider the design, it might be, you might consider doing designs that are more respectful of the existing architecture of the library as opposed to essentially a glass box grafted to the back of the thing.
Well, thank you for that comment. I appreciate it. And there will be a lot of time that passes between now and actually putting a shovel in the ground, as they say. So there will be more opportunities for feedback, and I certainly invite you to come. I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
For each of the libraries, you showed 3 different options. Is it decided now already that these are the options that we picked for each library? Which is totally okay with me. I was just wondering if those other ones were still in play, or if this is what we're looking at now.
Thank you. The working group was established in order to provide direction for the project. And so when we were looking at these 3 options for each building, we were looking at, as Philip was describing, the program goals and the space that support those program goals. And so the projects that were recommended because the working group saw them as the projects that would most adequately support the program goals that we were hearing from the community.
Great.
Okay, I'll move to this side of the room, please.
We have an existing set of elevators right behind us. Would there be an additional set of elevators added in here?
No, the same elevator would be the only elevator for this building.
So if someone were coming in, is it this entrance or another new entrance on the ramp at the accessible entrance? Then they'd have to go back in here and use that elevator.
So the way that we're getting around having this lift that you see in the back of the room now is with ramps that go up to the next level. So instead of having this extra lift, we would solve that with the ramps. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. I hadn't even thought of that, but that's been a chronic problem too. You know, getting people up on that level. But so we still have the front ramp that comes up from the parking lot. But then this would be an additional ramp. What would be the advantage of coming in here?
Well, this exit is often used as, I mean, even though it's an emergency exit,
Right.
it's used because it's convenient for performers who are coming in with equipment, for people who might be coming to a program with strollers in rainy weather, or food. Yeah, so we're seeing it as a way to improve access to this space.
Yeah.
It wouldn't become a new main entrance of the library. It would be an auxiliary entrance that also connects the library with the garden.
Okay. And then I'm trying to envision an activity going on in here and then people trying to come in here to cut through.
Yeah, we wouldn't want people cutting through, and so we would avoid that by basically maintaining this as an alternate exit, an alternate entrance for after-hours events, for example. So those kinds of pieces.
Thank you.
Right behind you.
I do the moving and grooving here for a lot of years.
Oh,
and
yes.
I use this room, and
Yes.
I'm just thinking, I love the idea of having more light, but everybody comes through there, they get a ticket. I'm thinking, what about the security?
Yeah.
You know, how is that gonna work? Will there be, you know, security? You know, just how is that gonna work in that
Yeah.
respect? So that was my thought. The other thing that I wanted to share today, I was visiting the Watertown Library, and I learned that they have a maker space. And I was so excited to see, and I didn't even know that this existed, but I really would want this to be part of something that's accessible for the Arlington residents. And I know that I'm speaking for a lot of artists that would like this to be something that happens in a community space. So I'm wondering if there's space to think, where could this happen with this design?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have heard from a lot of people in town who are interested in maker spaces. There's actually a nonprofit in town called the CoLab, and they've been,
That's me.
So the CoLab has been exploring spaces in town where they can create a makerspace or support a makerspace, and we've been meeting. Well, we had a meeting so far about how we can support maker activities in the library. And one of the moves that we've made in that direction is establishing the Library of Things. So the Library of Things consists of all of these makery tools and crafting equipment and so forth that really support that spirit. Whether or not we could support a distinct makerspace in the library, really remains to be seen. I don't want to say absolutely it's not going to fit. It's too early at this point. So we'll see like kind of where the trends go and how we might incorporate that element. But
Use a maker's
What is
art,
makerspace?
you know, that's another idea.
what is a makerspace? Great question, sorry. A makerspace is a space, usually it's a distinct space within a library or another facility where they house 3D printers or other kind of digital experimental equipment, scanners, tools that help people like sewing machines. And you are invited to come to the space and use the equipment in the space versus taking the equipment out of the library and using it at home. Some makerspaces do both, but anyway.
If anybody attended the Arlington High School meeting last Monday, a week ago, and you looked at the designs for the new high school, one whole wing of it's going to comprise a large area for makerspace with all the equipment for both the students and for continuing ed and for the community use. So they'll have that option built into the new high school.
Yeah, can I just follow up on that too? I think that, so I'm part of an organization that Andrea referenced, the CoLab in Arlington. So we've actually got money from Mass Development to do a feasibility study of opening a CoLab space or a maker space in Arlington, and we're about finished that. And I think what we've been looking at in talking to the schools and with Andrea is about a relationship. So that if you can't have it at the library, maybe library, the Internet of Things is where they start, and then they come to us, and then how do we then integrate with what they're building at the high school? So there is a conversation in town about how to open a makerspace. And I appreciate your help and support for everything we've been working on.
Absolutely.
And I think with the art center, the new art center in the senior center building, I think they're also looking at some kind of a studio, common studio space or something.
We're working with them.
Yeah,
Okay.
we actually have a relationship together between,
Meeting
See, this is what makes Arlington such a wonderful community. Synergies are happening in this room right now. Yes.
Yeah, my first question was going to be about the makerspace, but you answered that. One of the things I'm happy to see, and I came, was because I was out of the country, but I met people from other part of the country, and a lot of their libraries are going all electronic and getting rid of their collections. And I was concerned about that with the idea that, you know, books were not needed in the library anymore, and it was better to grow and build. And I wondered how, because I think collections of books are really important, I wondered, did you examine that? And if it is a trend in the rest of the country, why is Arlington doing what I think is a good decision not to go that way?
Yeah, I don't think Arlington's alone. I mean, as special and unique as we like to be, I don't think we're alone in wanting to preserve physical collections. I read the literature, and I know that we're not the only libraries that want to sort of honor both kinds of uses. I mean, we're seeing, if you just take our e-reader and our e-book use alone, I mean, we're seeing a hybrid user. We're seeing people who, some of whom prefer one over the other, and some don't care, they just want the book that they want. So I think we're really keen on honoring that hybrid use in town that was evidenced so abundantly in the survey results. So, in the back row.
Hi, this is sort of a crass statement perhaps, but what about parking? I thought when
Did you say parking?
The automobile, when I retired, I thought, oh goodness, I can go to the library anytime I want to. And the answer is no, no you can't, not if you want to park the car.
Parking, parking, parking. I hear you. I think you know, it is an eternal issue here in town. There's limited space, and the scope of this project really was never intended to address parking. That said, I completely appreciate the parking struggle, the ongoing parking struggle. One of the ways that we've seen that struggle improve a little bit is actually with the meters and with the control that's imposed on the lot that serves the library. I know that people have opinions about paying for parking at the library, and I completely appreciate that. However, I also have seen that the turnover is better and people, there's actually more availability of spaces.
One thing you might consider doing, both Belmont and Lexington do it, is you have a very small number, like 2 or 3, spaces that are 15 minutes only, free.
Yeah, the spaces directly in front of the library entrance are actually 15 minutes free. I think part of this is just educating people too, yeah.
I'm thinking of somebody who is using a walker or something.
Yeah.
They'd walk further, sometimes a lot further.
Yeah, that's true, that's true.
But you might consider the, some kind of a near the ramp, 15 minutes free. They don't seem to, there's nobody sitting around, I'm most familiar with Belmont, there's nobody enforcing it, but everybody seems to respect it.
Okay, thank you. It's a creative solution to an
Just
ongoing
something to think
problem.
about.
Yes.
I was hoping for some improved signage of the hours, particularly on Mass Ave. I don't know if you know how many people come when the library's closed on Thursday morning, but I do, because for 3 years I was part of a sewing group that met next door at the church, and our window overlooked the steps. And it's shocking, the number of elders and women with strollers that are trying to get into the library, and they get all the way up to the door. It happens week after week. I mean, there's probably hundreds of people over a month. And yesterday, or Sunday, it happened to me again. I was leaving the church at 2:15, and I see this woman pull in next to me and start to unload her baby.
Yeah.
And I see an elderly man very slowly working his way up the steps. And it's a simple solution, We need to have a big sign on Mass Ave that people see frequently, and it gets, embedded.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, on the snowy, icy days, they're not schlepping up the steps with a stroller, And
Yeah.
would that cost so much?
Probably not. I think your point is well taken. I think we could do a much better job of advertising our hours so that people aren't making that struggle up the steps or parking or paying for parking and then finding out that the library is closed. So I think part of what we want to achieve overall, perhaps as part of this project or perhaps sooner, is just improving people's accessibility and use of the library. I'm always interested in that. So not all of the suggestions that we hear tonight are necessarily going to have to wait. And I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Yep.
I heard people talking about 3 or 4 stories at the Fox when I went to the meeting, and people had all kinds of very reasonable suggestions of how they would all be filled. I was very disturbed to see the idea. I mean, the era of 1-story buildings on Mass Ave is past. We need higher 2, 3, 4 stories to have vibrancy in this area. So that's a terrible idea. Please don't do it. And please don't build a glass box on this. The era of the glass box is, thank God, passing. Where people are getting over it. Please don't build it onto this beautiful building.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. I think that with respect to Fox, we have to look at what we can support in terms of the library organization. So right now it's designed as a library, and we want it to remain a library. In order to support the building, we have to look at the staffing model that we have now. We can't anticipate that we'll be doubling staff at Fox. So when we talk about building up or building additional spaces at Fox beyond the single story, I'm very sensitive to that because of the staffing model that we're working with now, and we don't have assurance that we would have the staff to support all those additional spaces. I appreciate your comments though, because you're right, we did hear in the original meetings that it would be great to have mixed-use buildings or residences on top of the library, and I hear that. It's just that right now, those partnerships, those ideas, that requires a lot more than just sort of the scope of this study. That requires conversations with the town or,
Well, and this is the time to have them before we spend $6 million and go, oops, should have built 3 stories, do this, start doing that stuff now. There's a lot of support for that, and you'll have help.
Andrea?
Yes.
Sorry. Can you just explain the rationale of the working group and the option we chose for Fox to allow for that for the future?
Sure. So the working group, when we were looking at the second story or third story for Fox or multiple stories, we talked about the importance of at least having a structure that could support that going forward, so that I mean, and Philip did speak to that during the presentation, but we want a structure that's going to have the potential to support multiple stories if they are so desired and so supported by the town, by funding. Please.
Yeah, just to follow on to her point, that it actually makes sense to have a multi-story building because, and then you can put tenants upstairs because it gives you a revenue stream. And I'm sure the library would like to have a revenue stream by renting out properties that aren't being used to those who will pay. That'll give you.
It's quite a different model than what we're working with now, but it's
something to think about. It's a little outside the box. But remember, decades ago, this library was housed in a different building and you paid rent to somebody else. It's not always been its own freestanding building owned by the library.
Yes.
One of the things, with the glass box sort of thing, I've just done a project where I've been to about 100 libraries in the state of Massachusetts, and I've seen a lot of different things. And the one thing I like about that is light, because that's one thing that I find in this building, it's so dark. And what I'm wondering, and that's what I like about that configuration, is that it actually lets some light in. So regardless of how that's going to be, I'm wondering, how is lighting going to be handled, especially natural light, in the rest of the library, in keeping with the current way that it is architecturally sound?
I think the idea is to maximize natural light. So one of the reasons why the working group recommended that the third floor study rooms be sort of transparent is to promote that flow of natural light. And I think we'll be looking at that throughout this project. We need to improve the lighting all over the building. I completely agree and appreciate that suggestion. I think there are lots of creative ways to do that, and I think lighting has progressed since the 90s, and the options are much stronger for, levels, brightness.
I think one of the ideas that we were testing in the library is if we were able to expand and create more space, that gives us more flexibility with the stacks the way they are right now. So if you go to the main level, you'll see that the stacks go almost up to the ceiling, and they're filled with books. So if we have a little bit more flexibility with how we can plan the stacks, you have some lower stacks, you'll have better sight lines in the library as well. So there are ways to maximize the daylight that you are receiving in the existing building. But we also realize, as Andrew said, that lighting technology is much better. Lighting design has come a long way since this building was built. So we would be increasing lighting throughout, artificial lighting as well, much better lighting in the building as well.
Yeah, I was wondering why there aren't any windows that go out that way. It's like facing, southwest, and it's where the natural light is, and all the windows are over here facing north, which it doesn't get natural light directly.
Yeah, it's a balance. It's a balance, and again, as we try to preserve collections in the library, we have this issue. We have a lot of museum projects too, and you love to get natural light, but sometimes you just need walls to hang things on. And same thing happens in libraries. You need to preserve some walls to contain collections. So it's something, what I'd say is that right now these are architectural concepts. So the design isn't completely developed. The plans aren't completely developed, but they're concepts. Once this project does begin, we will be looking at things in more detail, how the exterior expression of the addition, how lighting works, how we can get more natural daylight into the spaces. So that's part of, and then the next phase is about developing the plan for funding these. The next phase would be really digging into the design in a more detailed way.
And also mention that the seating, we made a conscious effort to sort of reorganize seating on this facade and the Mass Ave perimeter. So the photocopiers right now on the first floor, as you may know, got a nice sunny spot. So we've moved the technology from that facade and populated more with seats looking out to that.
Yeah, all the way in the back.
Yeah, I wanted to voice support for the new connection to the landscape and the park adjacent, both through the windows and this new entrance, which makes this outdoor space by the children's and it makes sense. And I'm wondering, two things kind of connected to that. One, I feel like that will become a very desirable entrance and kind of create a new pressure point in the corner there. And then you talked about parking not really changing. I'm wondering how the landscape and that space there will change to accommodate this new change in grade and the new, what will become, I think, an important entrance, at least for families with kids. That's one thing. On the flip side, we talked about adding more seating on that side, on the Matt's Ave side. Does the teen room also get seating? I feel like there's a doorway that exists towards the parking lot and the church that's not used. Can the teens also have that sort of indoor-outdoor connection and seating of their own?
For security reasons, we wouldn't be maintaining that as a main entrance. Same goes for this entrance here.
Okay.
We would really want to maintain that, that one main entrance for the library. We also, we do that for security of materials as well, because we have the gates there. So those are a couple reasons why. But to your question about, I wasn't sure about your question about the, like, what was your question about the?
I was picturing that. So how accessible is that entrance? I mean, not in terms of ADA accessibility, but can anyone enter through there anytime during the day?
When I talked to the head of children's services, so the head of children's services was involved in this, the staff working groups that consulted on this project. Obviously, that's a very important part of this design, is supporting children's spaces. So when we talked about operationalizing the space, we talked about the importance of the ticketing that happens for story times and how we would want the children and the families to keep flowing through the children's room in order to access this space. So rather than make that the main way that people come in for story times, we would probably use it during inclement weather, but we would probably still want people to filter through the building to this space, because it opens their eyes to our collections and it opens their eyes to the other collections that are in the library. So that it's the sort of milk in the back of the grocery store. You know, we want that entrance we want everyone to have to go through the library to get to the spaces that they want to be in, whether it's the addition or this room or somewhere else.
Who knows, they might even find a book.
Yeah. Might even find a book.
It looks like from the rendering that it opens up all the way to that existing space, but lower by the sort of reading up. As a parent with small children, I would love to be able to bypass, you know, where my kids melt down and dragging them up. Exit, that's something. My other question is this presentation going to be available online? Or can we see the full slide deck?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Well, I don't know about the full slide presentation here, but yes, we will be making it available. Yes. Yes.
So we didn't see the other renderings of the Fox Library, you know, the other concepts as they were rendered, and I was curious, you know, whether that rooftop and terrace was explored at all along the lines of what the other gentleman said. I do see that as a revenue potential of a really unique space that could be rented out for various events, so it wouldn't necessarily burden the library with maintaining it or even carrying the liability for it. And it looked like an enclosed glass too. It doesn't even necessarily have to be open, and then that adding a second floor might be a little less, you know, cumbersome, sort of light.
Well, that's a great point. So again, I think the idea is that we would be able to support something like that if we actually have the funding and the other resources that we would need to do that. But I think in terms of honoring the collection space that we have and the way that the library is programmed right now, the design did not include the rooftop terrace. But you're not alone in dreaming about it, that's for sure. A lot of people were fantasizing about a rooftop terrace with a vegetable garden. Yes?
Just a quick comment about the elevator and the concern that if we're moving more of the collections upstairs, that we need better elevator, a rehab elevator or a second.
Well, great news on that front. We actually have a new elevator, an elevator overhaul in the capital plan for fiscal year 19. So we don't have to wait long before we have a new elevator for this building. I'm happy to say, because Our elevator has failed multiple times in the last several years. Yes, in the back.
I'm not sure how you measure this, but how is the space available for storage of the collection impacted by these different plans? Normally when libraries are renovated, you see less shelf space for books in the end, and a lot of books disappear. I'm afraid this is happening with our aim of having libraries that are more like a Borders bookstore with coffee and comfortable seating and low shelves and all that kind of thing. I don't hang out in the library much, but I use it frequently to get books to read. And I find more and more that the books I'm after are not here.
Okay, well that's a two-parter. I'm seeing that as a two-parter. So in terms of the existing collections in this building, one of the things we were really focused on was preserving the collection space, because we heard from so many people during the surveys and the original public meetings that very point, that people want the collection size to be maintained and to be supported by the new designs.
Or better yet, grow.
Or grow. Or grow. So when we were looking at the spaces, we did a thorough inventory with AMBEJA support, a thorough inventory of all the collections, and then a very sort of rigorous layout of the collections. And I worked with my staff to figure that out as well. So these designs that you saw tonight actually do support the existing collection that we have. And we're going to see the collections change over the next few years as well. I mean, I don't know how much longer people are going to be taking CDs out, or DVDs for that matter. I'm not saying, don't worry, not going away anytime soon. But I think those are questions. It's a great question, and it's definitely paramount on my mind as we go through this process. Yes.
Space is one of the original and primary reasons, I think, for any improvement such as this one. The presentation doesn't deal in any measures of total space added, etc. Certainly added versus this option versus this option. Could you comment on that in terms of, is it going to be a primary factor, or was it involved to the point where one could see the amount of additional space for storage or other reasons? Because Philip did mention the approach to the storage was going to help the space issue, but again, in the presentation at least, there wasn't much emphasis that I could feel as far as space, additional space.
So one thing that we're bound by is the library property lines. So when we were looking at where to fit new spaces, I think pushing out to that property line was the limit. As far as actual calculations of square footage added,
it's about 2,500 square feet.
2,500
of interior space on 2 floors, across 2 floors.
Across 2 floors.
Right. And then a fairly sizable outdoor terrace. It's probably another 300-400 square feet.
So the outdoor terrace also adds some space, but that's not part of the calculation that I think you're pointing to,
actually,
right?
It's the information that wasn't presented that I guess I'm asking about relative to space improvements, not that you're adding space. How much was it?
About 2,500 square feet.
What percentage was that?
Ooh.
It's about 40,000. Yeah.
So a pretty small percentage.
So it's a pretty small percentage. Yeah.
Maybe.
And the Fox is the same.
Yeah, same footprint.
That's the rest of it. It's
but we're
Robbins
gaining space we're gaining a lot more space at Fox, just in terms of the downstairs and how it's being used now versus how we would like to see it used in the future. A lot of the spaces down there are languishing. They're housing some supplies that are not going to need to be stored in the future, and so on. Yes?
They're not languishing, they're not letting people use them. I would love, because it's so noisy there, I would love to use that space, I get shoot out of it.
Are you talking about the lower level in Fox?
It's a nice, quiet space, and you're not allowed to use it.
Right, because it's not monitored. you can use the community room. We promote community room use, but those other spaces are not actual, they're not formal spaces in any sense.
It's the only quiet in the whole place, so.
Well, that's why we're looking at adding some of that laptop seating along in the corner. But yeah, I think we're going to be hard pressed to establish a totally sacrosanct quiet space unless we do one of those. There are actually cones of silence that you see coming up at libraries now, which I love. I mean, I forget where cone of silence comes from in pop culture, but what?
Get smart.
Get smart. So there's potential at Fox to establish perhaps some isolated quiet spaces, but it's such an open environment, and that's I mean, we want to support that. That's one of the things we've heard valued about the Fox space. But yeah, it's hard pressed to find a quiet spot at Fox. That's true. Yes.
So on a practical level, first of all, I actually really love the glass box, but love the light. On a practical level, when the Fox is closed, because I guess it's a full demo, are there plans to have a temporary library maybe in the Heights?
What an interesting idea. We gave up the Heights Library to ACMi, who are here tonight. Thanks, ACMi. Hi. We hope you love the Dallin Library that you're in. So it's a great question.
Walls crumbling in.
Walls crumbling in. Oh boy. So in terms of swing space, I mean, the goal is to maintain library services throughout any type of construction that we do. That's very important, and we're certainly focused on that. As far as adding services in the Heights during the time that Fox is closed, it's not an idea that we've explored. One of the options, or one opportunity potentially, is to create a bookmobile or some kind of cool temporary pop-up library. Who knows?
And then park it in the parking lot and then eat up all the parking spots.
Well, maybe not that.
So I'll say one more thing about the glass box and the issue of light. Actually, I like the light and the concept of the room. I'll just offer that there are ways to create a structure that honors the integrity of the old building, looks more Victorian, say, and would still produce the effect you're looking for, which is light. And I think about, your architectural history is better than mine, but the Crystal Palace in London in the 1850s was a Victorian structure. It was all glass, very light, something to think about.
Thank you. Yes, right behind.
I didn't hear or see anything regarding energy efficiency.
Oh, well, I hate to say that goes without saying, but with any new construction, we would absolutely be looking at creating buildings that are easy to maintain and easy to, it's not all about easy, I guess, but materials that.
Yeah, what I'd say is, one thing about the Robbins Library that we found in our assessment is it's actually well taken care of in terms of the systems. At the Fox, but as we look at new systems, we would definitely consider, we would be required even to consider sustainability, energy efficiency. Lighting is probably going to be one of the biggest gains. You see a lot of fluorescent lighting here, but with current technology with LED lighting, that will be a big improvement in terms of energy efficiency anywhere. But of course, and then as new systems are added, they would be energy efficient. At the Fox, it's a different story. As I said, those systems really are end of life. So that would be a big opportunity to look at more energy efficiency at the Fox, but lighting as well. I'd say, one of our ideas with sustainability is that, to get the best use, to maximize the use out of this historic building, which has been here for over 100 years. And so I think being able to renew and revitalize this building is sustainable to begin with, so.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't really know how the Minuteman network works, but one way of expanding collections that do they work about trying to, instead of all libraries buying new books, then if in the network, it's not just electronic, because the only way I know of them is electronic, but if there was a rotating way that the network bought new books, and then they were focused at libraries, and then, at least so that the community could be aware of new books, and then they move on to another library, but you have interlibrary loan, and you,
Right.
then the libraries it wouldn't be the expense to our community to build our collection, but overall there would be a growing collection.
So interlibrary loan definitely supports the concept that we share resources between and among Minuteman libraries. So that's why, I mean, a lot of people, they even if they live outside of the Minuteman network, they like to use the Minuteman network because of the variety and the robustness of the Minuteman collection. When it comes to book budgets, those are, and this is a little bit beyond, you know, what we're talking about tonight, but I'm happy to share.
But if you dedicated an area in the library that these new books could come in, so that people could know that they could see what are contemporary new ideas in libraries.
Like in a bookstore that says new
arrivals.
There is an area.
Yeah, so we do maintain a new book section upstairs in the reading room.
But is it just for stuff that's bought by Arlington, or is it stuff that comes into the network, so that you would?
Arlington,
Just
yeah,
Arlington. Okay.
yes. So, yeah, we balance the
That's to
buying.
get around the budget issue so that it could be shared, but I know how hard it is for communities to cooperate in this.
Oh, the Minuteman network is wonderfully cooperative. It's an excellent system, and yeah, we do. I mean, everyone benefits who's in this room, I'm sure, from the Minuteman network. Yeah.
And I will say that from time to time I'll be among the stacks and find it very sad to see 5 copies of a book that was very popular 3 years ago, and I think, and are there 5 copies at many other Minuteman member libraries as well, because particularly with bestsellers and all, I mean, I think it's really over the top when you ask for something that's a little more scientific or a little more arcane, and you're waiting 6, 7, 8 weeks for it from out of state, out of DC libraries.
Yeah.
You know, it just seems that money's that's spent, bestsellers come and go.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not commenting on just bestsellers, I'm
Right.
just saying.
I think this is such a great, it's so poignant to me that we're now just talking about books. Like, this is case in point of where Arlington's values lie. Like, we are now just interested in talking about the Minuteman network and books. Are there any other, and DVDs. Are there any other questions about the design or about the project? And we'll shift over here just for a moment and then come back to you, okay? Yep.
I have frequently noticed that people sitting along the garden wall of the building need to look to more shade rather than more light, especially during daylight hours when they're trying to work. So I'm a little concerned by the lack of opportunity to generate a more shaded space in the proposed addition. In the proposed addition that we see.
On the 2nd and 3rd floors?
Yes, where it's going to be all glassed in with no kind of, no obvious kind of lines or shades or shading. So is that to suggest that people who need more shade should go to another part of the building, or is there going to be a way to find shade in that area?
I think we'll need to promote both, or support both desires. So I know, I hear what you're saying, like, but we're not going to make the entire.
No, I understand that. It's just that the blinds on the garden wall tend to be, they are often placed in such a way that patrons have a hard time reaching and operating them.
Okay.
They are frequently yanked so far up that even if you can reach them, you can't get them down. And that's going to be a completely unshaded space except perhaps for the trees, which, you know, the statements about energy efficiency are reassuring in that it doesn't seem like that should then turn into an oven in the summer. which is always a concern when you see an enclosed glass space like that.
So, yeah, can I speak to your, yeah, so one of the things that I remember hearing from Philip, and one of the things we talked about, both with respect to Robbins and Fox, was this idea of glass that has the AV, or the UV, thank you, AV, UV, not an architect. So yes, so I think we're interested in protecting the materials too, I mean, not just the people, but UV protection and shading options. I think those are the types of finishes that are gonna be later stage decisions and certainly important to be voiced throughout as we move along this process, which is, it's a marathon, not a sprint. But yeah, there will be plenty of opportunities to consider the shading options and to look at the shading options that people are going to want and need on every floor.
And I guess one of the things too that we have started to talk about, but would be developed in more earnest when we get in design, are seating options. And I think as we've heard from the community, heard from people in the library, what we really understand is there is a diversity of needs and a diversity of preferences. Some people like being seen, some people like seeing, some people like being in quiet, private spaces. So as we collected all this information, what we realized is that we need to create a diversity of spaces to match all the different needs and preferences throughout the library. Seating is going to be a big part of that. So really, that's why we have group areas, we have private areas, we'll have spaces by windows, spaces that are more focused on shade or technology for all the different needs. That's something that we'll be developing in more detail, seating options as we get into design.
Is there a question here?
Yeah, I guess, in my understanding of how architectural projects come together, I don't think this is a thing that's been addressed yet, but I want to understand when I need to be watching to participate, which is questions about how the structure impacts issues of light pollution around town. Thinking about how it's lit up at night and how the especially if we're talking about building structures, which I personally love, that are very open and have large expanses of glass. But when you have that much and then you leave lights on in the middle to be safe, then you increase light bleed out into the streets and makes it harder to see the stars and all of that. So when do you anticipate topics like that coming up? It's obviously you haven't done it yet. That'd be crazy.
Yeah.
When should I be paying attention?
Well, I want all of you to be paying attention as we move along. I mean, there are going to be lots of ways to stay engaged, and I am obviously committed to communicating on a regular basis about the ongoing plans as they develop. So I think, just please stay tuned, sign up for our newsletter, and stay engaged as much as possible. There won't be anything like that happens in secret when it comes to public buildings. There's no such thing. So I do encourage all of you to stay engaged and speak up during the times that we invite speaking up. Yes?
Hi, this is just a tiny design comment. It's a really small one, but Belmont has a place where you can return books without parking in the main parking lot. This is a good thing. What you need is a place where somebody can pull over by the side for 5 or 10 minutes. I'm not sure that a drive up, like the post office has, would really be appropriate. I think it might have a harsh effect on books and videos and whatnot, but some way that you can return books without having to park in the parking lot.
And then
Yeah.
do
Like a roundabout.
Yeah.
It's tough. I mean, we've got to work with what we've got.
Yeah, I know, but it's just, again, it's something that I think a lot of people would like.
Yeah.
And I'd be willing to give up a parking space for it.
Oh, wow. You heard it here.
Would you?
You heard it here, folks. Thank you for your comments. Yes.
I wondered, in the plans, or if it could be incorporated, like in Cary Library, they have a corridor that can be, it's an artist exhibit space, or it can be public education if there's an important issue, like if there's some programming on climate change and somebody has wonderful, a lot of things are much better displayed, and the library's function can be education with visual type of displays, and this
Yeah.
library in this town has a dearth of areas where you can put up displays and education or art, or any of that. It doesn't necessarily have to be an art gallery. So I just think when you're trying to think of the walls or the corridors, if there's a way to maybe think about programming that into the building, it makes it a less sterile place.
Yeah, absolutely. And our public table, our public display table upstairs in the lobby area is constantly booked, as anyone who's tried
Yeah,
to
well,
book
that's
it
one
knows.
thing, but it's just
Yeah.
also walking along and being able
This
to.
wall right here could be made into, this room could be made into a gallery.
Yeah.
With proper, hanging systems.
Yeah, we've talked about that. Again, someone has to maintain that gallery space. Someone has to schedule
it's a staffing
it. It's another job for
Yeah.
someone, and so I'm always mindful of that. But I love the ideas, and I love the idea of promoting more places to showcase public art.
But if we could coordinate more entities in town, like the Makerspace is trying to work with the Arlington Center for the Arts.
Yeah.
The Arlington Center for the Arts works with the library.
Yeah.
You don't have to staff up, you don't have to do it all, you can find other groups, and we
Yeah,
don't
the
do
partnership
enough of that in
opportunities.
this town.
Yeah, the partnership opportunities in
And I
this
think
town are
that's
really
what
great.
the planning program that I went to a year or so ago was
Yeah.
just talking about trying to get people to coordinate more so that it's not as much
Yeah.
of a stress.
Oh, absolutely, and that's why I've been so excited to be involved in the Cultural District project, because that's been a real coalition of various public arts groups, ACA, the Chamber of Commerce, so bringing all of these forces together, the library, to support local culture and arts, and really figure out ways to make those partnerships pay off a little bit better. So
Yeah, there's
that's
a new Arlington Commission on Arts and Culture.
for arts.
so
Yes,
hopefully that-
absolutely. Yeah, we had a representative here from that entity. Yes.
So regarding makerspaces, it sounds like a great idea. Do you have a budget for maintaining the equipment? Because what will happen is people using it will break it constantly. And that means you better have somebody on staff who's going to fix all of the machines that they're on.
Yeah, so like I said, we haven't really baked in a makerspace to the new space. We are interested in, again, partnering with CoLab, partnering with other entities in town that support makerspaces.
Then make sure
You're
there's
absolutely right. It's
a
a
maintenance
huge
budget. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
just a matter of buying the stuff,
Yeah.
you have to maintain it, and
Oh,
it's expensive.
absolutely, and that's something that we are very poignantly aware of in the library. We any new peripheral that we're adding, whether it be a public PC
Yep.
or a catalog on a different floor, it all has to be maintained. So
Yeah.
your point is well taken. Yes.
I was at the event last June, and this has come out way better than I thought it would. I'm very impressed. I mean, there's just, the realities of this, it's going to be, there's tons of constraints, the physical building space, parking, and, we aren't using the libraries the way this was built anymore. Anyone that's ever opened up their kitchen and wants an open kitchen now, I mean, this is kind of the comparison of that. I think the flexibility that's been built in, is fantastic. Looking at the history, there's not going to be another change for like 35 years, right? So that's a big thing to look forward to. And so I think it's really done a nice job kind of doing a lot of different things, being very forward-looking. And unfortunately, there's way more demands on this than in any way realistic. And so I think this just feels great, so thank you.
Oh, thank you. All right. We do have to wrap up. The library closes in 15 minutes. I'm going to be that announcer now.